Okay, everybody. So my name is Holly Rosen-Fink. I'm from the World Jewry Committee at Westchester Jewish Center. And I'd love to welcome all of you to Paris, which we are going to be in one moment. A year ago, almost exactly, I was in Paris with my daughter. She was 16. And we explored Jewish Paris, and I got in touch with Flora Goldenberg, who is a tour guide. And didn't get a chance to go on her tour, but today I get to, and with all of you, which is so exciting. I want to give Flora the full floor, so I'm going to let her introduce herself and take us to Paris. Please put yourself in speaker mode. Know that I am recording this video if you want to share it with anyone later. Please drop your questions in the chat box. If you feel compelled to chime in, feel free. This is an interactive tour through the Marais in Paris. If you picked up croissants this morning, please enjoy them. And with that, I'd like to pass the torch to Flora. Flora.
I unmute. Hello, everybody. Good morning. It's the afternoon here in Paris, and I'm happy to be here with you. So I hope everybody can hear me well. And we are going to take a tour together today in the heart of Le Marais, which is the Jewish quarter in Paris. And I am going to explain you about the history of the Jews in Paris and France through many centuries. So we're going to start basically with the Middle Ages, and then we're going to go through history until nowadays. So we're going to talk about the situation for Jews in France today as well. And please feel free to ask me questions, because even though today we can be put together through a virtual technical miracle, it's also really great if you can ask questions as if we were really together in Paris today. So don't hesitate to write your questions in the chat box, and I'll make sure to read them, and also unmute your microphones if you have questions, or just raise your hands and I'll try to see if anybody has questions. All right, so we're going to start this tour today in a beautiful place, which is a park that I'm going to show you, which is right there around me. We are in the heart of the Marais, and as you can see, it's pretty busy today because Sunday is always a busy day, especially in the afternoon in Le Marais, the heart of the Jewish quarter, because everything is open, even though it's COVID and the shops are closed. But right now, restaurants can have, takeaway food, and people like to come here to enjoy many of the treasures that you can find in the Marais that I will explain you about. And to start with, I will tell you a little bit of the history of this area so that you can understand a little bit better where we are and why and when the Jews decided to settle here. So first of all, I'm going to share with you a map, a picture of a map of Paris that you will be able to see right now on your screen. So please tell me if you can see it, but you should be able to see it. It's a map of Paris.
We can see it. We can see it.
Good. So you can see the districts on them, and you can see near the center, you have district number 3 and district number 4. Both of these districts represent the Marais where we are today. So it's the very center in Paris. And as you can see, these areas, right now we will be walking through the 4th. These areas are very close to the river, the Seine River that is in Paris, which means that in the past, it was kind of a problem for this area because it was always flooding. The river would flood very often. And so that's why this area took its name from the swamps. So the Marais in French means the swamps because it was very wet all the time. And it was flooding a lot in the Marais. Now, this Marais area, swamp area, was not really a nice place where to live for many, many centuries because it was too wet until the beginning of the 15th century when people started to dry a little bit the Marais, the swamps, to make it a nicer place where to live. And some of the kings eventually decided to have their country houses here. So that's when people started to occupy, to live in the Marais a little bit more, but it was still not very built yet. Through the Middle Ages, actually since the Roman times, the first Jews already settled in Paris. They settled on the island where the Cathedral of Notre Dame is today. They settled on the left bank. And some of them also came here in the Marais, in the swamps, because it was a place where most of it was empty, where there was a lot of space to live, but also it was a place which was outside of the city walls of Paris. And the Jews were not always allowed to live as free citizens in Paris. So they were basically expelled on and off for centuries and centuries since the Roman times until the 14th century. And when they left Paris and eventually were invited to come back, they didn't have the right to come back in the center of the city, but they had to be near the city walls. So here the Marais was near one of the city walls that was built around Paris. So that's how it became a Jewish area already in the Middle Ages. So they stayed on and off in the city of Paris, in the center, and here in the Marais on the left bank as well, in a place that some of you might know, the Latin Quarter, until 1394. In 1394, the Jews were expelled by one of the kings called Charles VI. They were expelled because of the anti-Judaism, which was very strong in the Middle Ages, which means that people basically accused the Jews of being responsible for killing Jesus, for having too much money, because most of them were bankers, and they were responsible for everything that was going wrong in the country in general. So in 1394, it was decided to expel the Jews who didn't accept to convert, and they will not have the right to come back to France until the French Revolution in 1789. So for about 400 years, the Jews will have to leave the kingdom, and they will not have the right to come back until the 18th century. So I cannot really tell you a lot of history of Jews in France or in Paris from the 14th century to the 18th century, because nothing was built by them. If some of them still lived in Paris, they lived here in secret. So they didn't have the right to really practice Judaism. And a lot of them left to other countries or to other places in France, because keep in mind that France was not as big as it is today. So the borders of the country were a bit different. Some of them, for example, went to Provence in the south of France because it was under the Pope's protection. So we're going to talk mostly about what happened to them in the 18th century when they were finally allowed to come back. So first of all, I'm going to look in the chat to see if you guys have any questions. Not yet, so don't hesitate if you have any about anything I started to explain already. So this place where we are now in the Marais is very interesting for one reason, which is something very interesting in front of us. It's a private mansion. It's very important to see the architecture that you have in the Marais today, because it explains a lot about the history of this neighborhood and why the Jews decided to come back to this area after the French Revolution. You should know that the Marais, as we said, was a swamp, and until it became a little bit more dry and then easier to build. And in the 1600s, a lot of aristocrats came here to build this beautiful private mansion. So a private mansion is basically a mini palace, a small house, but it's actually quite big for one family. And they have these private gardens in the back. So right now we are standing at the back of the private mansion. And on the other side would be a courtyard, the front of the private mansion with a big door. And it was one beautiful house for one wealthy family. You have lots of them in the Marais today. So those houses were occupied by the aristocrats for a couple of years, since they were built in the 1600s until the French Revolution. In the French Revolution time, in 1789, the aristocrats were all beheaded, or they escaped, as maybe some of you know. Huh? We can talk for hours about the French Revolution, but basically they were attacked during that time. And so all these beautiful homes were abandoned and completely empty because the aristocrats were killed or they left. In the same time, you should know that the Jews will start to be accepted in France again. The reason why is because of our three main words of France during the French Revolution: liberty, equality, brotherhood. which means that in the French Revolution, it's decided that everybody is equal, everybody is a citizen, everybody will get the same rights. And so that's when the Jews were allowed to come back to France. So when they come back to France, they are emancipated. It's the first country in all of Europe where they have all these rights and liberties. And so they decide to come back straight away to Paris to start a new life and to start building, you know, their whole life. So it works. It starts very fast. And when they come to settle in Paris, they decide to settle here in the Marais, simply because all these houses, like the one I was showing you, are empty and abandoned. So it's a perfect place where to settle. So once again, right here, you can see one of these houses, private mansion here. Then you can see the top of another one right here. And so it's a perfect place for them where to settle, because you have a house that you can split into many different apartments. Then you have a garden, like the one where we are, and you can have your workshop here. And on the other side of the building, where you have a courtyard, you can have your shops where you can sell everything that you made in the workshops in the back. So it's a place where a lot of Jews that are, yes?
At some point, can you give us just population numbers, like how many Jews we're talking about at the different period, just very broad ones, like how many people came back after the revolution, what the population grew to, just some sense at the different periods, please?
Of course. So we don't know exactly, of course, how many, but we think that in Paris, just after the beginning of the French Revolution, which means like a couple of years after it began in 1789, we are talking about 3,000 Jews that are back in Paris, which is not a lot. I mean, it doesn't sound like a lot today, but it was actually quite a lot already, because they just started to come back. And the population will keep growing on and growing until the Second World War, basically. The reason why is because the Jews first came from other countries or other cities in the kingdom, the former kingdom. But then they also came from Eastern Europe and Central Europe, because as you maybe know, there were many pogroms and a lot of anti-Semitism in Poland, in Russia, that was starting in the 19th century and in the 20th century. And so most of the Jews who came at that time to France, they came from these countries where they were very persecuted. And here in France, they were persecuted before, but not anymore. They have all this freedom. So a lot of them came, and that's how the population kept on growing until the Second World War. You should know that in the beginning of the Second World War in 1939, there were about 320,000 Jews in France. So it grew basically from 3,000 to 300,000 in about 2 centuries. And the Marais will really be the first place where the Jews were coming, especially the Jews from Eastern Europe and Central Europe. So it will become the heart of the Jewish Paris, and that's what we are going to see today. So let me look into the chat if I have questions that are written. No, I think that's good. Okay, so let's start walking already. So here you can see a small park with nice apple and pear trees that are not growing yet. It will be for the fall time. And right there in front of us, you can see a piece of an old tower. As you can see, the stones look quite old on this round piece of architecture. This was a piece of the city wall that was built around Paris in the 1100s. And so right now we were in a park beyond those walls, because the Jews had to live on the other side of the walls. And by going on the other side, you would be entering Paris. The reason why the Jews had to live on the other side of the walls is because it was a way in the Middle Ages to ask the Jews to pay taxes each time they were coming in the city. Like these people right now, we are entering the old city of Paris and making our way towards the main Jewish street. So this park where we are now is very special because it was named after a very important man that a lot of Jewish people knew here in the Marais. You can see his name here written at the entrance of the park. Joseph Mignoret was not Jewish, but he was a righteous among the nations. That's what it's written in French, juste parmi les nations. He was a resistant, and he was a former director of a school called Hospitalière Saint-Gervais. So Joseph Mignoret is a very important man here because he worked in one of the schools in the Marais where a lot of Jewish kids were going. And unfortunately, when he was director of that school during the war, when Paris was occupied, 260 children from that school were deported and didn't come back. But he decided to help as many kids and as many families as possible as he could by hiding them in an apartment that he had in the area, in the Jewish area. And he was also able to help most of them to get fake IDs, to be able to hide. And it was also, his role was also to help them get in touch with the resistance and the different networks of the resistance that existed in France. So Joseph Mignoret, like all the righteous among the nations, was not Jewish, and he helped the Jews without asking for anything in exchange. So this is why today he became a righteous among the nations, which means that he received that distinction, that an honor from Yad Vashem and from the state of Israel. And you can see some of the names of the children who unfortunately were deported in this area, because you have here in this part a commemorative plaque, which says that arrested by the police of the Vichy government with the Nazis, more than 11,400 children were deported from France from 1942 to 1944 and murdered in Auschwitz because they were born Jewish. More than 500 of these children lived in district number 4. Among them, 100 were so young they never got the chance to go to school. So here are their names so that we can remember them. And when you go close to it, you can see their first names, last names, and the age of the children. So you can see the first one, Beth, was 5 years old. Charlotte was 4 years old. Therese was 9 months old. And you can see here the names of 100 young children, the ones who didn't go to school yet. Their brothers and sisters, if they were older, eventually went to school, which means that maybe they were at the school of Joseph Mignoret, who helped some of them to escape or to hide from the deportation. So this man is one of the many righteous among the nations. We'll talk again about the Second World War a little bit later. He is very important, as so many French people who decided to help the Jews, because thanks to them, not all of the Jews were deported from France. And it is very important because French history is very weird, because during the war happened one of the darkest pages in our history, because the French government, that we call the Vichy government, decided to collaborate with the Nazis. But on the other hand, so many people decided to help the Jews, which is why among the 320,000 Jews that were in France before the war, 76,000 were deported, which means 25% of the Jews. It also means that 75% of them were not deported. And one of the reasons why is because so many people like this man decided to help the Jews. So I'm going to check in the chat box, but I think no questions. So right now we arrived on Rue des Rosiers, outside of the park where we were. This is the main Jewish street. We are going to walk through that street for a little while. And I'm going to show you a couple of shops and stores that are interesting because of the presence of the Jews. This one is not specifically Jewish. As you can see, El Gonzo is a shop selling clothes for men. But when you go a little bit closer to it and you look at the site, you can see some very cute Jewish pictures. So if you look at this one right here, it's a picture representing, a painting representing a bar mitzvah, where you can see a rabbi and a young boy reading the Torah. Because before becoming a clothing store, I'll try to show it a little bit better. It's up here on the wall. It was a Jewish shop where you had Jewish books and where they would sell also, you know, any kind of artifacts or any kind of object that you need for a bar mitzvah, for a Jewish wedding. So you have these Jewish paintings with another one, which is a painting of a Jewish wedding, that show how the Marais area has changed very much, because from a very Jewish area, it also became a very trendy area, very hip and trendy. So that's how a Jewish shop selling also, you see, things for Jewish weddings became a clothing store. So it's an area that became very gentrified, but it is an area that still remains very Jewish with its Jewish decoration and Jewish shops and restaurants. It's a little bit of both, but because it became so expensive to live here, some Jewish families couldn't stay, so they had to sell their shops or restaurants to go to some other places. Now here we are standing, sorry, this is me, in front of a shop covered in yellow mosaics, as you can see. And this is actually where my grandfather's restaurant used to be. I'm going to share a photo of how it used to look like before so that you can kind of compare. So this is my old grandfather's restaurant. You can see it was written Joe Goldenberg at the entrance of the restaurant, delicatessen store with David stars. It was specialized in Ashkenazi food. And you can see that it was exactly the same mosaics and colors on it. So here it is again. There you go. So here you can see it today. So you can recognize the same facade. And the building above is actually the building where I live today. So I'm lucky to still live in the Marais, just above my old grandfather's restaurant, in an apartment where he used to live. And it's a place which became actually kind of famous, but sadly famous, because in the 1980s, a terrorist attack happened here. As you can see over there, there is a commemorative plaque to remember an attack which happened on the 9th of August, 1982, here in Goldenberg restaurant. Some tourists came and killed 6 people and 22 were injured. And you have the names of the victims. So it is an important plaque to remember the attack because it was aimed as it was a Jewish place in the heart of the Jewish district. And the terrorists were coming from Lebanon. They were coming from the Fatah movement in Ahmadinejad. And they killed these people because they thought they were going to kill Jewish people. Unfortunately, most of them were just clients at the restaurant that day. And after the attacks, it became a famous place where to go if you wanted to show your support to the Jewish community here in Paris. Unfortunately, my grandfather and my father had to close the restaurant in 2002, but the facade had to remain exactly the same as how it used to be in the past because the Marais is very protected by a law that says that you cannot change any of the facade on the front of the building, even if it's not a restaurant anymore. And as you will see right there on the side of the building, my family name is still written over there above the close. So still the same facade and the same building, but it's not a restaurant anymore. So my family came from Russia. Then they went to Turkey before coming to Paris. And they represent very well the type of people, the type of Jews who came in Paris in the beginning of the 20th century to start a new life, because Russia, like Poland, were not welcoming countries for the Jews. And so that's how so many of them chose to come to France. So they settled and they were able to become quite successful. But like many other Jewish people who came into the Marais, they were not successful. Like they didn't work in banking jobs or they didn't work in very French administration buildings. They had to create their own life because a lot of them couldn't speak French. Most of them were speaking Yiddish, or they were speaking their the language from their original country. So they were not able to assimilate as well as the next generation. So we were talking about these waves of immigration of Jews who came from Eastern and Central Europe before the Second World War. But here in France, today, the biggest part of the Jewish community is the Sephardic Jewish community that came from Africa, from North Africa, in the 1950s and in the 1960s. And as you can see with this beautiful bakery in front of us, Murciano, they brought their traditions, pastries, and food with them. So here, Murciano is a kosher Jewish bakery opened by a family from Morocco. And a lot of Jews arrived in the 1950s and 60s from Morocco, Tunisia, and Algeria because those countries were French colonies. And when they became independent, a lot of Jews who lived there were able to speak French. So they decided to come to France for practical reasons, but also the Jews from Algeria had the French citizenship since the 19th century. So it was very easy for them to come here. Now, as you can see, we go a little bit closer to the windows. So I'm glad you guys have croissant because this way you don't feel like having one without having one. So you have the French pastries, croissant, chocolate croissant, apple chausson, or the almond croissant. But you have also these Jewish specialties, the halot, as well as the specialties from North Africa, pastries, or from North Africa or from Eastern Europe, because the Jewish communities adapted their specialties to the countries where they came. So if they came from North Africa, of course, they would start making their own specialties, but they would also make French specialties to adapt to everybody. As you can see, it's a very busy place. A lot of people like to come here, especially on Sundays, because a lot of other places are closed in Paris. And it's a very, very good bakery. I could see in the chat that some people like this one very much when they traveled here. And I'm not surprised. It's a very good one. Now, getting into the Rue des Rosiers, a little bit further in the street, you'll see that it's pretty busy, even though we are supposed to be under a lockdown right now. It's very busy because everybody is holding these yellow sandwiches, you see, the falafels. It's a very famous falafel restaurant, which is making them. And everybody comes here on a Sunday to eat those. So you can see people come here for basically one reason, to eat these sandwiches. Yes. So you can see how busy it can be for these sandwiches. In front of some of the doors, you can notice the mezuzah. For example, one right here, and you can see many in front of a lot of the shops in the Marais. And right now we are going to stop in front of the entrance of a building, which is very interesting, even though from the outside it doesn't look very special. So you can see actually two Jewish men coming out, a Jewish couple first, coming out from it right now, because in this building there is a hidden synagogue. So it's a synagogue which is very important because it's the oldest one in all of Paris. When I was telling you about the Jews who came in France in the time of the French Revolution, when they arrived in the 18th century, they start to have rights and liberties. They have all these new, they have this new freedom that they never had before. And so they feel like they can settle in France, but they're afraid that they're going to be expelled again because they were expelled and kicked out from Paris so many times. They think, why would we build such a beautiful synagogue like others in the world? Because if we spend all that money and then we are expelled again, it's money that we have wasted. So instead, they would have these small prayer rooms inside of the building in the very beginning to make sure that they have places where to pray. And each community from each different country where they came from would have their own place. And that's how they started to have this small synagogue hidden in the building. So here in this building, you have one which is from the 18th century, and that's how it looks inside. It's very cute. So here you can see a picture of inside. I'm not taking you inside today because of the lack of 4G. Unfortunately, in the old buildings, there is not enough internet. So you were going to lose contact with me if I was going inside. So that's why I'm sharing pictures instead. And here I'm going to share another one of the inside of the synagogue so you can see a little bit better how it looks there. So you can see it's quite small. It looks like a small Parisian apartment in which you would have like benches for people to sit, a small library, and of course the bima in the center. It's facing east, and you can have minyan every day, you can have services every day. And this one is particularly famous because it's a place that belongs to the Lubavitch movement today. It's a Chabad synagogue, so it's pretty active. A lot of people come in and out of this place during the week and also the weekends. And it's a place which is also very famous because of the fact that it's the oldest one in all of Paris, as it's been here since the 18th century. And also because it's a place where the great rabbi of Brooklyn, Schneerson, the rabbi, came to daven when he studied in Paris. As maybe some of you know, the rabbi studied at the Sorbonne University in Paris. So this place is one of the many synagogues that were built, even though it's not a real synagogue that you can see from the outside, but the real one on the inside, that we have in France today, because as soon as the Jews were accepted,
She frozen for everybody else? Yeah? Okay, let's hold on for a second. She'll be back. Hold on. She'll be back in a second.
in the streets around us, there are lots of them, and all of them are very active. So some of them are Sephardic, some of them are Ashkenazi, it depends, of course, of the place. And all of them can be pretty active, especially during the high holidays. I could see that there was a question in the chat box. What happened to your family during the Holocaust?
Okay.
How were they saved from deportation? So it's a very good question, and actually an interesting place to ask the question, because right now we are standing in front of a building where you can see it's the outside of the store, above which you have some apartments. And in one of the apartments is where my grandmother used to live, because unfortunately after the war, my grandparents got divorced, and that's where my grandmother lived, but not very far away from the restaurant of my grandfather. Now, I can explain you here my grandmother's family. So my grandmother's family was coming from Poland on my father's side. And she was born in Paris, like her sister too. But both parents were born in Poland. In the beginning of the occupation, when the French government decided to collaborate with the Nazis, the Jews who were not French citizens were the first ones who were very, aimed by the Nazis, but also by the French government, which was very racist, but also very anti-Semitic. And so that's how the father of my grandmother was arrested right away in 1942 and deported to Auschwitz, and he didn't come back. In the meantime, his wife, my grandmother, and her sister were able to find places where to hide in Paris. They had fake IDs, and that's how they were able to survive the war. But they stayed in Paris, which was very dangerous, because it was one thing to try and escape to other countries, but staying in Paris and staying hidden in Paris was really difficult, but they managed, and that's how they survived the Holocaust. On my grandfather's side, the one who had the restaurant, I can actually share a picture of him, because I have one nice picture right there. You can see, where is it? Okay, I'll share it a little bit later because it was right there, but I'll find it a little bit later when we are walking. So I have a grandfather who who took over after the war, the restaurant of my great grandfather. They were coming from Russia. Before that, sorry, from Turkey. Before that, they were in Russia, then from Turkey. And then they arrived in Paris, and they lived here near the Rue des Rosiers. I'm going a little bit away from the noise because some of you pointed at that there was too much noise behind me. And they They lived all together in a small apartment. One day, the Nazis came to arrest my grandfather's family. He was not at home with his brothers. They were outside, working outside, and they were lucky not to be deported, while their sisters and their parents were all deported. So basically, half of his family were deported to Auschwitz, but he survived. He stayed in Paris and he hid for a little while. And then he was able to go to the south of France, which was a safer place for the Jews were to go, because for a little bit longer, the Nazis didn't occupy the south of France, but only the north of the country. So that's where they stayed. And then he came back to Paris at the end of the war, and he survived the Holocaust like this. And then he took over my great grandfather's restaurant, and that's how they survived. On my mother's side, it's a little bit different because my mother is originally from the Netherlands. She's Dutch. And in the Netherlands, both her parents were very young. They were able to hide in the countryside in the Netherlands with farmers. But my grandmother's mother was deported to Auschwitz and never came back. But the rest of the family was quite lucky to have places where to hide. And that's why on my mother's side, most people survived the Holocaust as well. I hope that answers the questions, but of course it was as difficult as you can imagine for Jews in an occupied country from basically 1942 to 1944. Now, one thing which is important to mention, the war ended on the 8th of May, 1945. But if some of you know that, France was liberated in the summer of 1944, almost 1 year before the end of the war, which is why it was a little bit easier, we can say, for French people, for Jews in France, to hide or to escape the Nazis, because they didn't have to stay hidden for as long as they were in other countries, because it was the first country to be liberated from the Nazis, almost a year before, for example, the Dutch. So in the Netherlands, it was a little bit more difficult than it was in France, for example. Now, if we get back to the street here, you can see that it got very busy, and that's why it's a little bit noisy around it, because there are lots of people around that falafel restaurant, which is the famous as du falafel, which is the H for falafel. So they sell these really good sandwiches from the Middle East, with chickpeas balls and pita bread. So it's very fresh, it's very good. And it's a very, very successful shop. As you can see, the lines don't get shorter even during the COVID pandemic. A lot of people come here on Sundays to have their sandwiches. See the lines and the busyness around it. So it's really what attracts people here, right? Some really, really good restaurants. There you go, and more people coming, and the line doesn't stop, and it gets bigger and bigger all day long. So right here, people are just having their falafels to go. Yeah, I can see that's the shortest line I have ever seen. So you should know that the situation in Paris, because of the pandemic, is not really good at the moment. And this is why most clothing stores around us are closed today. Since the end of the week, those stores had to close. They were open for many, many weeks before, and they just started closing by the end of the week because of new restrictions. So another restriction is that you cannot travel outside 10 kilometers away from your house. So a lot of people who were eventually coming from the suburbs on Sunday to spend the day in Paris, they can come this weekend because it's a little bit too far from their homes, because they cannot go too far away from their homes. And so that's why it's not as busy as it usually is. But for example, last week on a Sunday, the weather was actually quite beautiful like today, and the line was 3 times bigger than what you can see here. And of course, when people can travel from other countries beyond borders, it's even more busy. So of course, yes, today it's probably the short line that some of you have seen at the falafel place if you came here before. We can see one person who raised hand. So Aime, if you want to talk, you can unmute your microphone if you have a question.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Hi. So my question is this. You mentioned that the Jewish people moved into the homes that the aristocrats left. But the
Yeah.
building you were standing in front of looked like something built during the era of Mr. Hausmann rather than earlier. Did Hausmann participate in building this district?
Yes and no. So actually the building I was showing you, so thank you for the question. For those who don't know, Paris is a really old city. So if you look at the street right now, see the street is quite narrow. This is an old street from the 18th century. And the streets back then in the Middle Ages and until later were very narrow and winding and not very safe. It was difficult for people to go through the streets of Paris because of traffic, because there was no sidewalk. You see here, no sidewalk. So if there is a carriage coming down the street, the pedestrians would be completely covered in mud, or they would be pushed away by the horsemen. So that's why Paris eventually has to be rebuilt in the 19th century. And Napoleon III and Haussmann decided to tear down about 80% of the city to rebuild it. But the Marais was not totally torn down. Some of it was preserved, especially thanks to Victor Hugo, because he was able to say that he didn't want some of the most beautiful and old area of Paris. He didn't want it to be torn down completely. So that's how the Marais remained very old and very beautiful. The house that you saw before is an original building from the 17th century. What makes you think that it was built in the 19th century is because the color of the stone is the same. The iron balconies look alike. And it was done on purpose because when Haussmann and Napoleon III decided to rebuild the city of Paris, they didn't want the new buildings, if I can say new because they are still from the 19th century. They didn't want the new buildings to look too modern, too different from the old buildings. But the private mansion that you saw is an original building built in the 17th century. Sorry.
Thank you.
Do you have another question?
Not at the moment.
Okay, no, I mean it answers the question.
Thank you.
that
Yes.
you had. Good. So back in the Rue des Rosiers here, you can see another beautiful Jewish bakery called Finkelstein, Sasha Finkelstein, specialized in Yiddish specialties, strudels. There is a small line in front of it, but a very, very good bakery with lots of good pastrami, hummus, a lot of good stuff. And it is a bakery which has been here since 1946. So it's really old. It was opened just after the war.
The way it's
That's a nice place. And when I turn around right here, you can see a nice, interesting name written in Hebrew, actually in Yiddish, with Hebrew letters. You can see street art, and the name of the plaque says the Pletzel. The Pletzel is Yiddish for the little square.
where
The little square is how the Jews called the Marais area in opposition to the big square. The big square was Place des Vosges, a beautiful square that we have in Paris. So the little square in Yiddish is the Pletzel, the Jewish area. It's quite recent, this plaque that you can see here. Above it, it says Rue des Rosiers, the name of the street where we are, and district number 4. It's a recent plaque that was made by an artist from who is a Hungarian, and he wanted people to remember, you know, the original Jewish identity of the community from Eastern and Central Europe. It's quite nice to see that name here. Right here in front of us, you have a Jewish bookstore. So the bookstores are allowed to stay open during the pandemic. Only clothing stores and non-essential stores can have to close. So you can see some of it is written on the left in Hebrew, some of it is translated on the right in French, and it's a really nice shop. Mezuzah at the entrance. They sell Jewish books, they sell Jewish artifacts, they sell some nice Jewish art as well, as you can see here in the windows. And it's one of the only one left. Of course, a lot here is presented in the window for Passover. A lot of these shops had to close because the area is very gentrified today. So the rent is very expensive in the Marais. And so a lot of these small shops eventually had to close, but this one is one of the last Jewish bookstores that is still open. Let me see. What can you tell us about the current anti-Semitism and the large departure of the community? So this is a really good question, Jewry. If you don't mind, I will explain about anti-Semitism in a couple of minutes. I will start with something very important about the Jews during the French Revolution and after, and then I will explain about the anti-Semitism as we are making our way to the Holocaust Memorial, because I'll have a little bit of time to explain on the way there. But I will keep it in mind and I will not forget to talk about it. Now, something which is very important to know about the Marais today, it's an area which is very gentrified, as I was saying. It's a place where a lot of the Jews lived, but where many Jewish people who lived here had to go because it became too expensive. It doesn't mean that it's not Jewish anymore. As you will see along the way, you're going to see other Jewish shops, other restaurants as well. And a lot of them just opened recently. A lot of them are Israeli restaurants specialized in Israeli food, because Israeli food is very, very popular right now. So when some of the Jewish shops, like a bookstore, is closing, sometimes an Israeli restaurant is opening. So it's not totally true that the Marais is gentrified so much that there is no Jewish shop anymore here. But of course, compared to before, a lot of Jewish families had to move to other places because the rent of the apartments became too expensive. So when they left, they didn't move very far. Today in Paris, you have other Jewish areas in many other districts. So if you go back to that map that I was sharing, you can see that Paris is not a very big city, but it is quite big with 20 districts. And a lot of the Jews moved to district number 11, which is very near the Marais, number 20, 19. So they just stayed near the Marais, district number 3 and 4, but they went a little bit more east and north, which are areas which are usually more like working class areas, where it's not as expensive as it is now in the center. And the 13th in the south of Paris is also a very big Jewish area today. The wealthy Jewish people in Paris usually live in the 16th arrondissement that you can see on the very left side of the map, on the very west of Paris. So most of them stayed in Paris. They just moved to other neighborhoods where the rents are not as expensive as they are in the Marais. So we'll keep walking down the street Rue des Rosiers. So right now we are back at the Finkelstein bakery, and we are making our way a little bit back down that street to go towards another street where you see other Jewish shops. Now you should know that here in the little streets of the Marais, you have other synagogues. Like in this building, there is another one that's very hidden behind the doors. They're not the only ones. There are 5 of them just around us today that are the very typical type of synagogues that were opened by the Jews after the French Revolution and in the 19th century. But a little bit later, a lot of Jews felt like they could finally be very welcome, like at home, when coming to Paris. And that's how in the 19th century and in the 20th century, a lot of them decided to start building big synagogues. Most of them were built near the Marais or in other neighborhoods by wealthy Jews and by the state, because the state will help the Jews to build their synagogues because they are represented in France like other big religions. So they have the same rights as the Christians, as the Protestants, and they get help from the city to build their synagogues. So that's why in the 19th century, they started to build a lot of these synagogues. And so some of them are really big, some of them are smaller, like the ones hidden behind the buildings. We have a little bit of both. And it's very interesting to see the different types of architecture and the different types of synagogues in the city. Here, another Jewish bakery, which is very good. Florence Can. See the facade is very pretty too, and it's very good for its pastries and bread. I'll show you a little bit of what they have here. So here, for example, you have all the bread and preparations for Passover. Lots of good cheesecake, strudel from Holland, and here you see with poppy seeds, apple, cinnamon. It's one of the bakeries that I like the most in the Jewish Quarter. Let me see if there are any questions. Okay, so we'll keep walking down the street. Now here, I was telling you about these Israeli restaurants that opened recently in Paris. Here is one of them, Miznon. So I don't know if some of you know it. It was opened by a very famous Israeli chef from Tel Aviv, where they make sandwiches with pita bread, but instead of falafels inside, they put French meal, like beef bourguignon or ratatouille or steak and egg, and it's really good, really tasty. They have 2 or 3 shops in Paris now. They have one in New York. So it's very popular. And in the beginning of the pandemic, this one opened, Alfie. It's a kosher place where they make pastrami sandwiches. So as you can see, it's quite popular as well. Now, out of the shop, if you look well, you can see this sign in orange, where it's written in Hebrew as well. So this is the kosher sign to mention that the restaurant is kosher. And it's important because here in Paris, a lot of the Jews who live in Paris are usually part of the modern Orthodox movement, which means that the majority of the Jews in France are not part of the liberal movement, reformed movement, but a pretty Orthodox, modern Orthodox movement. So a lot of them eat kosher food, at least regarding like the kosher meat. So a lot of the restaurants try to keep the meat kosher as much as they can, so that they can attract as many people as possible. Now here is the entrance of another synagogue. So right there you can see the door, and you can see that it says the foundation of Roger Fleischmann. You have the David Stars. So it's a place that opened in the 1930s, and it was opened by the parents in the family for their son, who was 19 years old when he died. You see it right here. So they decided to open a small synagogue to remember their son after he died, because he was pretty serious in studying the Torah. And so they thought only a synagogue could be appropriate to remember him. Now it's a place, once again, which is, even though it's mentioned outside, it's quite hidden in the back of this building. So you have here the door and apartments above, and you don't see the synagogue from the outside. So it's another one of the synagogues which is hidden in the back of the building that you can see. And right next to it, the kosher pizza place here was a small synagogue before that was turned into a pizza place. It was, that I know, the smallest synagogue in all of Paris. So you see more and more of these synagogues. Now, something that you should know about these synagogues, most of them today, they have a Sephardic tradition for Jews coming from North Africa, because most of the Jews who live in France today are Sephardic Jews. Before, they were for the Ashkenazi Jews, because before the Second World War, most of the Jews were coming from Central Europe and Eastern Europe. So they respected a different ceremony that was very different for the songs, for the prayers, and for a lot of the interior design. Of course, it looked very different. But after the war, many Jews were deported. Many of them decided to go to Israel or to the United States. So a lot of these small synagogues didn't have their communities anymore. And so that's when it was decided to switch the synagogues from Ashkenazi to Sephardic rituals. And today, among the whole Jewish population, about 70% of them are Sephardic Jews from North Africa. Now, in France today, you should know that we have the third biggest Jewish community in the world, after the one in Israel and the one in the United States. About 500,000. It's the biggest one in all of Europe. And I'm saying this to you to start answering the question about anti-Semitism, because a lot of people believe that we have almost no more Jewish community in Paris because everybody is leaving, but it's actually partly true. It's not totally true. And I will try to explain you about it. So basically today in France, I cannot deny that there is anti-Semitism. There was always anti-Semitism since the Middle Ages and since the Jews lived in Paris, and there will probably always be anti-Semitism. So let's be clear about it. For sure, anti-Semitism started a long, long time ago, and it will not go away. I strongly believe that it will not just disappear. But about the Jews who moved from France to Israel, you should know that many Jewish people who left, they actually didn't move out of France for good. A lot of them decided to come back because it was difficult to start a new life in Israel, because they felt still very attached to their home country, and because a lot of them didn't speak Hebrew. So for example, my family is a good example. My mother was a tour guide in Paris for about 25 years. And a couple of years ago, she decided to make Aliyah and to move to Israel. She's very happy there today. She's a tour guide in Israel as well. But she really likes to come back to France about 4 months in the year. And she still has a house in Normandy where she likes to go to spend her holidays. So it's difficult for her to really move out from France for good. Same with my father. So my parents are divorced, and my father lives in Paris about 6 months of the year, and 6 months of the year he lives in Israel. And that's what a lot of French Jews do. So you cannot really consider that they left for good, because they also like to come back to France a lot. And it is the same thing for the ones who decided to move to Israel because they retired. So they have a nice place where to be in the winter, like I would say the people who like to go to Florida in the United States in the winter to avoid the cold in the north of the country. So that's what a lot of French Jews do. And then they come back to France in the summer or at other times during the year to be with their family. Or some of them, if they didn't retire to Israel, they also really like to work in France because they make more money and they have a better situation. So they eventually go to Israel more for like a holiday kind of time. So yeah, I could see in the chat they become Israeli citizens. It's true, but they also, sorry, it was a question. So yes, they become Israeli citizens, but they also keep their French citizenship. So they have a double nationality, which means that they can travel back and forth very easily, and they can keep like work situation in France, but also live in Israel. The only thing that they have to do is to spend about 6 months of the year in Israel and 6 months of the year in France. Now, regarding the anti-Semitism for the Jews who stay in France, very recently people started to say that anti-Semitism was bigger in France than it was in the past, that there were many attacks against the Jews, and that it was something nobody had seen before. Then they gave some numbers about how many Jews were attacked and how many, for example, Jewish cemeteries were profaned. The thing is that we count more attacks that are against Jews on the internet than the real attacks in the everyday life, like, you know, meeting with someone, the wrong person at the wrong time, and being physically aggressive with the Jew. So it's important because, in my opinion, as a Jew in Paris today, I don't believe that you can feel the anti-Semitism very much in your everyday life. You know, you can walk around the streets like we did, wearing a kippah, you can go to the synagogue, You can have your very Jewish life and be very Jewish in Paris and live your life without any troubles. But if you go on the internet and you start looking for Jews, what about the Jews in France? What about the Jews in Paris? Most of the answers that will come up are negative answers, saying that the Jews are wrong, saying all kinds of stuff about Israel. And this is what is the worst right now. Even though there are attacks against the Jews, in your everyday life here in France, you don't really feel it. And that's why the Jewish community is still as big as it used to be a couple of years ago, even though some Jews left to Israel. A lot of them come back, and the number of Jews in France is not decreasing. It is actually right now still kind of increasing. It stays the same, and it's not as bad as it sounds. So I hope that answers the question. But of course, this is my opinion, and you could meet people who have a different experience than me because they were physically attacked, for example, for being Jewish. But you should understand that it's not something that happens every day when you walk around the streets being Jewish. Yes, Emma, if you have another question, you can unmute your microphone if you want. I could see your raised hand. Do you want to unmute yourself? I don't know if you heard me.
Okay, I'm here. Yes. So
Okay,
while you were walking on the Rue de Rosier, it occurred to me, I'm assuming and hopeful that some of the people walking there were actually undercover policemen.
They were what? Undercover policemen?
Undercover policemen who might have been protecting the streets.
Do you think they look like some?
No, not
undercover?
at all, not at all. But given what's been going on in the past with Charlie Hebdo, yeah, I would assume that there is some kind of police protection in that section.
Yes. So what you don't see is there are lots of security cameras, a lot of them. And also, of course, some policemen are undercover. And also some of them that you can physically, that are visible. You can see they just walk up and down the street sometimes, or they stay around the synagogue during the high holidays to protect the Jews, to make sure that nothing happens. So security is here, but it's either that you don't see it or that it's not here at the moment when you're walking through the street. But security was very increased after many attacks that happened in France or in other cities or in other countries. But yeah, you don't always feel it or see it, but it's here. Lots of security cameras as well. And it's important. It's also important probably to know that regarding the streets, Rue de Rosier and Paris itself, there was no attack here since my grandfather's restaurant was attacked in the 1980s. I've been living here since I was born, because I was born and raised in Le Marais. And the only recent attack in this area was in 1982 in my grandfather's restaurant. So that maybe also gives you an idea why people feel very safe here, even though, of course, the kosher supermarket in the north of Paris was attacked, or other places in France were attacked as well. You should know that, for example, here in the main Jewish area, nobody was hurt for many, many, many years.
Well, that's good. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome. No problem. Now, could see the chat box. Okay, my pleasure for the people who had to go. And so we arrived here at the Holocaust Memorial. So I'll show you where we are. So right here, you can see the big building of the Holocaust Memorial, and outside of it, a wall which is called the Wall of the Righteous Among the Nations, where you can see the names of all these non-Jewish people who helped the Jews during the war to hide them or to escape from France. Now you have here the list of names with a date. So for example, right here, you can see 1975 and all the names of the people who helped the Jews to hide or to escape. Now it's interesting to see that the year is the year when they became righteous. As you can see, it starts in 1964. So that's when they started to get that distinction from Yad Vashem but you can see the wall is really big and it keeps going down the street. So you have names of more than 3,000 people who helped the Jews. Now, if you look at some of their names, you can see here, for example, where my finger is, a minister, okay? Then you have here another one. Then you have here sister and father, abbey, father, minister. So lots of names of people who worked for the Catholic Church or belongs to the Catholic Church. It's very important because I was telling you that among all the Jews who were deported from France during the war, 76,000 of them were deported, among them 11,000, a little bit more were children. Well, it's a lot, but it's 25% of the Jewish population only, if I can say so. Thanks to these people, a lot of Jews were not deported. And one of the reasons why is also because the Catholic Church in France helped the Jews a lot to hide and escape. So that's why you see so many of their names mentioned on the wall of the righteous. You can see many, many more when looking at the names. There are lots of them. Another, like, for example, minister here, and the name of Father Gilbert, Father Abbey, and a name which is quite surprising here, Le Chambon-sur-Lignon. It's not a person, it's a whole village.
Right.
Near the city of Lyon in the southeast of France, a whole village where everybody decided to help the Jews, which means that none of them will denounce the Jews who came to that village to hide. Imagine a couple of hundreds of people and none of them denounced the Jews. So of course, the village itself is righteous, but also the minister who lived in that village and all of the people in that village as well. Tamara, if you want to unmute your microphone, if you have a question.
Hi, my name is Guy Harari. I'm here with my wife.
Hi.
I used to live in France. I lived in France in the late 90s. And back then
Yes.
there were about, in Paris and in France, there were about 600,000 Jews reportedly back then. And I hear that nowadays there are about 500,000 Jews. And I'm surprised that you are saying that nowadays the trend is being reversed and the population of Jews is going up. So that's my first question. And my second question is about the nature of anti-Semitism. I think back then it was more the far right against the Jews. And nowadays it seems that there is a strong influence from the Muslims against the Jews.
Yes. So about the first thing you said about the number of Jews in France. Of course, in France, there are mixed marriages, for example. So people marry from the Jewish community, marry non-Jewish people. So that could count as people leaving the Jewish community. But on the other hand, there is a strong movement of people going back towards Judaism that you can really notice today, because in my opinion, a lot of people feel maybe lost in a new world of social media and people traveling far away from each other a lot. So the ones who really stay, for example, in France and belong to a Jewish community, they feel very, very strongly attached to it. But I can also feel that a lot of young people are going back towards Judaism a lot. It's a very new thing that's happening, but you can already feel the difference, and you can already feel that it's going this way. So that's one of the reasons why the community keeps growing, because people are going back to their roots in a way. And in France also, women in general make still about 2 to 3 children per family, so quite a lot. So if they marry with Jewish people, they make more children than in any other countries in Europe. So that also helps to keep the Jewish community growing. And as I was mentioning also, you can hear about 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 Jews living from France every year, but you should know that among them, more than half of them come back. So they don't really have 4,000 people moving to Israel every year because a lot of them come back or they live in both countries. So I hope that answers the first questions about the number of Jews. And for the question about anti-Semitism, it is very true that it's not the same people who are against the Jews and before, even though there is a strong French national movement, which is a kind of coming back right now, the very extreme right hand in politics and people who follow them are very racist and anti-Semite. But it's true that, of course, the very extreme Islam is the main problem today regarding the Jews. So that's a new form of anti-Semitism. And it's almost always related to Israel, which is a new form of anti-Semitism because we kind of say that people are not just against the Jews, they're against Israel. And that's true for most of Europe. In most of Europe, the political parties usually say that they're more pro-Palestinian than pro-Israel, none like in the States, for example. So that's very true. But I want to say that the form of anti-Semitism or the people against the Jews, they have kind of always changed because in the past it was anti-Judaism, the Christians against the Jewish religion and the Jews. Then it became real like anti-Semitism of nationalists against the Jews. And it's true that now it's more this strong extreme Islamic movement against the Jews, but it doesn't, to me, it doesn't change the fact that these acts of violence always existed. I mean, since I was young, I always remember people saying on TV or on the radio that Jews were attacked for any reasons. And the attacks were almost pretty much the same. A Jewish person, a Jewish school, a Jewish synagogue, or a Jewish cemetery that was profaned. So if it's coming either from nationalist French people or from Arabs, I believe the terrorist acts look pretty much the same to me. Yes, you have another question? Tamar.
No, thank you very much. That was very
Okay,
very
I
good.
thought
You.
okay, no problem. You're welcome. And I could see some things written in the chat. Le Chambon-sur-Lignon, yes, that's the name of the village. So thank you for writing it for me. And yeah, I can see you guys have put links, so really good. Thank you for helping with that. So right now you can actually, we were talking about it right now in front of the Holocaust Memorial, 2 policemen on their bicycles are speaking with the guy of the security at the Holocaust Memorial. So you see they're right here, they go around and they check, even though we don't always see them. We have in Paris a lot of policemen on bicycles and on rollerblades because it's faster to go around cars this way. So here you can see also in front of the Holocaust Memorial, you have all these boards with Shoah written on it, because right now, as the museums are still closed in Paris, the Holocaust Memorial decided to organize outside exhibitions about the Holocaust. So you can see, for example, here the map with France, Germany, Auschwitz. So you have these outside pictures and documents so that people can read about them as if they were inside of the museum, even though the museum is closed. So just a few important information about the Holocaust Memorial in Paris. You should know that it's the oldest one that was ever built in all of Europe, in all of the world actually, because it started to, it was born already in the head of some Jewish people in 1943 during the war. When during the war, France was occupied, some Jewish people understand already what's happening, and they understand that the Nazis are going to deport many, many Jews, and that lots of them will never come back. So they think it's maybe time to collect as many pictures and documents about them to make sure that whatever happens to them, we can always remember them. So they think it's already time to think about the Jews later and how to remember them. It's also a way to make sure that you have documents and pictures and proofs of what the Nazis did to be able to make them pay for what happened, because they want to make sure that if the Nazis lose the war, you will have documents and proofs for trial. And so in 1943, they think already about justice. They think about how to remember the Jews. And of course, it's not a real Holocaust memorial yet, but they have all these documents in a building, and they hide the documents. After the war, they decide to bring them back to Paris. That's how they can organize some trials and show the documents at the trials to judge the Nazis for what they did. And they decide in 1956 to build the Holocaust Memorial. That will be the first one ever built. It got bigger since it was built in 1956, because in 2005, they were able to build the wall of names that I will show you on the picture. That was inaugurated by Jacques Chirac. Why isn't the picture here? Let's see. It's not recent. Okay, I'll show you that picture as soon as I can find it. I don't know why it's not in my folder. Okay. Well, I will get back on the Zoom because nowhere here. Okay, that's fine. Maybe Holly, if you can find it in the picture I sent you. It was a picture of the walls of the wall of names, where you can see the names of the Jews who were deported from France, 76,000 names. Now, this wall was inaugurated in 2005 in the presence of Jacques Chirac, our former president back then. And you should know that it was inaugurated again very recently, because a year ago, just before the pandemic started in January, our current president, Emmanuel Macron, came here to inaugurate a new wall of names to make sure that all the names were well corrected, because there were lots of mistakes and spelling mistakes on it. And so that's how it was inaugurated again another time in 2020. So it's the Holocaust Memorial, where things are happening every day, where they keep on, making more discoveries and more research about people's names, people's history. And so you can always learn more about what happened to certain people, even though they're still missing a lot of documents and pictures, because among the 76,000 names that are written on these walls, we are missing about half of the pictures of the people who were deported, which is a lot. So they're still looking for as many documents and pictures as possible. Now here you can see some part of the memorial that I really like. See all these David stars on the outside of the building. And it's really nice to see all the people reading about it. And so here, outside on these boards. Now, do you have any questions about what I was explaining? Yeah, French Village was an excellent series about French. So if you want to read or see things about France during the war or French history, there's also a book called Marais, which is very interesting. Maybe some of you read the book. It was a bestseller, or a movie as well. And it's really interesting about the Jewish history during the war and the occupation of Paris. Now here we are standing in front of a school, which is a middle school, on the front of which you can see these three main words of France: liberty, equality, brotherhood. And so the name of the book is Marais. I will write it in the chat. I can't remember the name of the author, but she was an American author. Marais. It's really good. So I hope you received it. So like in front of all of the schools where Jewish kids used to go, there is a commemorative plaque to remember the Jewish children who went to that school who were deported during the war. So it says that they were arrested by the police of Vichy government, which means the French police and the Nazis. More than 11,000 children were deported from France from 1942 to 1944 and murdered in Auschwitz because they were born Jewish. More than 500 lived in district number 4, among them children from that school. We should never forget them. So it's very important that the name of the French police of Vichy is mentioned on it, because for many, many years, until the 1990s, nobody wanted to admit that the French participated to the deportation of the Jews from France, until Jacques Chirac the president back then decided to make a speech to say that, yes, the French are also responsible for deporting the Jews, and it's time to talk about it. So that's why the name of the Vichy government, where that government was settled in the south of France, is mentioned on the plaque today. So it's important because it was one of the darkest pages of our history that people didn't talk about until 1995. Now, something also that I didn't mention yet about the three main words of France related to the French Revolution time in the 18th century, when the Jews were invited to come back to France because of liberty, because of the emancipation. Of course, they were not very organized yet, because a lot of Jews came from different regions, from different parts of France, but also from different countries. And so they didn't have anything to organize them around, you know, a building or around one major organization. And that will be the role of Napoleon Bonaparte. So you should know that Napoleon Bonaparte comes into power just after the French Revolution, and he becomes the Emperor of France in 1804. Here is the man we are talking about right now. So Napoleon Bonaparte decided that it was time to organize something for the Jews, because after the French Revolution, people were not allowed to have their religion anymore, because during the French Revolution, people were very upset against the Catholic Church, against the members of the clergy. And so they decided to close the churches and to take all the money from the church for the nation. When Napoleon Bonaparte comes into power, he understands that it's time to organize everything again for the Catholic Church, for the Christians, but also because of liberties and equality for the Jews and for the Protestants. So he will gather in the city hall of Paris, the Hôtel de Ville, some rabbis, some other people from the Jewish community, and he's going to ask them a lot of questions. Questions about the Jewish traditions, about the Jewish life, about the synagogues, about the schools, and the Jews have to answer the questions. Now, the problem with these questions, for example, what if a Jewish woman marries a non-Jewish guy? Are the children Jewish, or what if it's the other way around? And what if you eat kosher? What does it mean? So a lot of people have to answer the questions, but you probably know what we say. Where you have two Jews, there are always three opinions. So a lot of them don't agree. And so some people decided to build that organization with answers that they will provide to Napoleon, that Napoleon will like, and that will give birth to an organization called the Consistoire. It's not really something you can translate in English. It would be the consistory. It's spelled C-O-N-S-I-S-T-O-I-R-E, Consistoire. And it's the first real official organization that was built to represent the Jews in France. So it's very official. It means that the Jews have a relationship with the state. It means that the state is going to offer them money to build synagogues. It means that the state is going to help the Jewish community to belong in France like any other community. And it also means that they will have money to build these synagogues. And they will have someone, the great rabbi of France, to represent all of the community in the country. So it's an organization which is a modern Orthodox movement. It's also like the conservative movement that you have in the States. But here in France, we don't really have a conservative movement. Conservative would be modern Orthodox, basically because our conservative Jews here belong to a modern Orthodox synagogue, usually where men and women are separated, for example. So that's how the biggest movement of Jews together started in France in the 19th century. But of course, you will have movements of Jews a little bit more reformed. They started because they thought it was too strict. And on the other hand, you had Jews who thought it was not strict enough, decided to belong to a more Orthodox movement. So right now, I was showing you some small prayer rooms, small synagogues that were hidden Well, most of them belong to the consistoire, to the modern Orthodox movement. And the one of them I was showing you pictures of is very Orthodox because it's a Lubavitch movement of the Chabad. And now, to end our tour, I'm going to take you to one last synagogue, which is very beautiful and very big, that belongs to the Orthodox movement. So that's how you can see also a little bit of the different synagogues we have. I can see there is another here in the chat box, RST. Yeah, that's the book. And it's probably on Netflix too, yes, because the movie was very successful. And thank you for everybody who joined, even if you guys have to go. We are almost at our next and last stop. So here you can see where we are. More busy street. Here you are. Okay, thank you. Some Parisians saying hello. So we're going to cross that street and get to the synagogue across the street. So the consistoire today still exists. It's still the main organization to represent the Jews in France, but it's not linked with the state anymore because since 1905, we have the separation in between state and church. So nothing that is religious can be related to the state, which is that if you are a mayor or a minister or president, you don't have the right to really deal with religion. Religion is completely separated from the state. So here we are getting to that street called Rue Pavée, and we are arriving in front of here. The gate is the beginning of a yeshiva and a Jewish school. So all along the wall here is a Jewish school and yeshiva. You can see some beautiful Jewish street art. See how pretty, with Hebrew letters all around. And so just across the street here, this beautiful synagogue. I'm going to turn my phone around so you can see a little bit better because it's very vertical. There you are. You see it's quite big. This is called the Pavée Synagogue Agudas Akehilos. And it is a very famous synagogue in Paris that was built in 1913. It's a synagogue which is very famous because of the architect. The architect of this synagogue is called Hector Guimard. So maybe some of you never heard his name, even though he's really famous because he's the one who has built all the metro entrances in Paris. Very beautiful green metro entrances. And he's the main architect of Art Nouveau. Art Nouveau means the new art for the new century. It started in the very beginning of the 1900s, and it's the type of architecture which is inspired by nature, by the animal patterns, by the vegetal patterns. And it is an architecture which is very special too, because as you can see on its front here, it is not a flat building. It is completely, it is round. And it's not just all flat. It's inspired by the foliage, the nature, and the vegetal patterns. So this synagogue was built by Hector Guimard for two reasons. First reason is because Art Nouveau is a type of art that you can build very fast with very cheap materials. So it was very convenient because when this synagogue was built, it was built for Jewish people from Russia and from Poland who didn't have a lot of money to build it. And they thought in the 1900s, it was time to show to France that they really belong to France, so they can have a real big synagogue built instead of the small hidden ones. And they also want people to see that they are quite modern as well. They don't have to be always the old-fashioned people. And they want their children to believe that it's okay to go to the synagogue because their children didn't want to go to these very old type buildings anymore. They wanted to go to some nicer, beautiful place, just like the Christians would go to a big, beautiful church. So they were looking for something a little bit more grand. So that's why the Art Nouveau was perfect to build something big because it's not expensive and you can build very, very fast. The reason why is because the material is usually concrete iron, bricks, something that's not expensive to build with. And Hector Guimard was also chosen because he was married to an American Jewish woman called Adeline Oppenheim. Adeline Oppenheim was Jewish. She was from an important Jewish family in America who had debts. So with their money, they were able to help building this synagogue. And that's how they chose him to be the architect of this synagogue. So Hector Guimard built other buildings in Paris, but that's the only synagogue that he built. And so today it's a historical monument. You can see it's active. You have lots of people going in and out every day. And it's also very active because it's right in front of the yeshiva and the Jewish school. And I will show you that the building here, I don't know if you can see, I'll go a little bit closer, was signed by the architect himself on the building. It's right here. You have his name on the wall, Hector Guimard, 1913, just above the wire. Even the letters are Art Nouveau, very curved, not straight. It's very French to sign a building on its front. And so just outside from the black gate to the other side over there, the blue door, it's the yeshiva and the Jewish school. In the chat. Okay, yeah, thank you. And thank you for the French, for those who had to leave. So it's an Orthodox synagogue I wanted to show you to end with because it's a very beautiful building. And it shows you that we really have many different types of synagogues here for the different communities, from very Orthodox to more Reformed, although the Reformed movement in France is not as big as it is in the United States. And we still have a lot of work to do for Reformed synagogues here. And also regarding the women becoming rabbis. So far in France, we have only 3 women rabbis. So it's gonna change probably. That France is very traditional regarding religion. So it's taking a little bit of time to change. Do you guys have any questions?
Flora, that was amazing. No? Flora, that was
Thank you.
Excuse me, does anyone have any other questions before we sign off? Flora, thank you so much for spending your morning with us. And thank you to everyone who stayed for the last hour.
Thank you.
I feel like.
Well, I'm glad if you guys enjoyed, and I hope I was able to make you travel a little bit to Paris today. And I hope that we'll have the pleasure to meet for real soon. If some of you have the chance to travel to France in a couple of months, maybe.
Decided that we're gonna come see you this summer. we're going going to London. We're gonna jump on a train now and take a day in Paris because of this tour. So thank you so much. And speaking of England, everybody, I am doing an informational session about Jews in England. Not quite the same as Flora's amazing tour, but I'd love to see you all. It's on May 2nd. I'm putting the link in the chat right now. On the same night, we're having these 2 amazing Holocaust survivors. Their names are Saul and Ruby. You have to come to this session. You'll never forget these people. They're 96 and 97 years old. They're in a band called the Holocaust Survivor Band down in Florida. And they have the most incredible story. And we're going to send you the link to watch the film as well. So everyone, please come to that. Does anyone else have another question for Flora before she signs off? Flora, thank you for bringing us to Paris. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for inviting me to be here with you today, and have a great day.
You
for
too.
us, it's already almost 5, so the end of the day.
Yes,
but
have a wonderful
I really hope that you started your day well with croissant and a little tour of Paris.
Very memorable. Marilyn, did you have a question before we sign off? Because you looked like you were going to ask something. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Flora. Thank you, Tamar and Guy, my friends in Atlanta.
And happy Passover, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thanks. Oh,
Thank
my friend
you.
came on. Oh, Tamar.
Yes.
Tamar, show yourself.
No, oh, why?
Tamar and Guy, show yourself. These are my friends. These are my very good friends.
We're in pajamas.
We're in pajamas.
Yay, you came on. Yay.
Thank you, yes.
It's good to see you guys.
You too. Well, I'm actually not seeing you because I'm not on gallery view. There you are. Hi.
Guy, you asked a
And-
great question. I knew you were going to have questions for Flora.
Yeah, it would be great to have her address in case we go and we want a tour.
I put it in the chat box, but I'm going to email
Great.
everybody. I'm going to email all of you who attended all of these links, so don't worry.
Okay,
I'm
great.
going to send you
Thank you.
everything.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
All right.
You guys.
Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye, Flora. Au revoir. I'll see you this summer. I'm going to
Bye-bye.
get with you.
Yes, I hope so.
Absolutely.
See you soon.
Thank you so much.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
What did everyone think?
Oh, great. We're
Magnifique.
Hi,
excellent.
Iris. Oh, I'm so glad you came.
Magnifique.
Très bien.
Magnifique. Fern, did you enjoy it? How was your croissant?
Oh, delicious.
Good.
Am I the only one that got one?
No, Susie. No. Many people got them. Susie, how were your croissants?
My new friend would get one.
Susie,
Yes.
how were your croissants?
Oh, I'm eating it. I didn't want to interrupt my listening. I'm about to have it right now. with
And
my
did you
cup
enjoy
of
the
coffee.
tour? Did
I
you enjoy
just
the
wanted
tour?
to focus on what she was saying. And I want her address and her contact. Of course, I will be in Paris next summer.
I will send you guys everything.
Good. Thank you, Holly. This was
I'll send you guys
ingenious.
everything. I'll
Absolutely
send you all the
ingenious.
books and all the films and everything in the chat box will come to you all.
Thank you.
Hannah Halston, how are you?
Let me know when you're.
You hear me?
You ready to get out? Okay.
Hannah?
All right, we're gonna leave.
Sorry, that's my dog. Hannah?
Hannah?
Amy, thanks for coming. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye.
Good Pesach to all.
Thank you. Ruth, are you still there? Shh. You having trouble logging off, everybody? I'm just copying down the chat box. Take as long as you need. Hannah? How do you do that? Ruth is still on the, how do you save everything so fast? Olivia, can you come help me a second? I know you know how to do this really. I want to save the chat box, copy the chat box, but it's taking me forever and I hate it. How do you do it in one full swoop? I want to save everything in the chat box because I need to send like some books and films and stuff. No, you can save it. It's taking so long. Wait, maybe I do this. No, that doesn't work. Ruth, are you there? Some people aren't logging off. Wait a minute.